Tuvalu, Valu, 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 Valu. Tuvalu TOO-və-loo or listen too-VAH-loo, formerly known as the Ellice Islands, is an island country in the Polynesian subregion of Oceania in the Pacific Ocean. Its islands are situated about midway between Hawaii and Australia. They lie east-northeast of the Santa Cruz Islands, which belong to the Solomon Islands, northeast of Vanuatu, southeast of Nauru, south of Kiribati, west of Tokelau, northwest of Samoa and Wallis and Futuna, and north of Fiji. Tuvalu is composed of 3 reef islands and 6 atolls. They are spread out between the latitude of 5 deg and 10 deg south and between the longitude of 176 deg and 108 deg. They lie west of the international date line. Tuvalu has a population of 10,507 2017 census. The total land area of the islands of Tuvalu is 26 square kilometers 10 sq mi. The first inhabitants of Tuvalu were Polynesians, according to well-established theories regarding a migration of Polynesians into the Pacific that began about 3,000 years ago. Long before European contact with the Pacific Islands, Polynesians frequently voyaged by canoe between the islands. Polynesian navigation skills enabled them to make elaborately planned journeys in either double-hulled sailing canoes or outrigger canoes. Scholars believe that the Polynesians spread out from Samoa and Tonga into the Tuvaluan atolls, which then served as a stepping stone for further migration into the Polynesian outliers in Melanesia and Micronesia. In 1568, Spanish navigator Álvaro de Mendaña became the first European to sail through the archipelago, sighting the island of Niue during an expedition he was making in search of Terra Australis. The island of Funafuti was named Ellice's Island in 1819. Later, after the work of English hydrographer Alexander George Findlay, the name Ellice began to be applied to the whole 9-island group. In the late 19th century, Great Britain claimed control over the Ellice Islands, designating them as within their sphere of influence as the result of a treaty between Great Britain and Germany that demarcated their respective spheres of influence in the Pacific Ocean. Between 9 and 16 October 1892, Captain Gibson of HMS Curacoa declared each of the Ellice Islands to be a British protectorate. Britain assigned a resident commissioner to administer the Ellice Islands as part of the British Western Pacific Territories BWPT. From 1916 to 1975, a referendum was held in 1974 to determine whether the Gilbert Islands and Ellice Islands should each have their own administration. Due to the results of the referendum, the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony legally ceased to exist on 1 October 1975, and on 1 January 1976, the old administration was officially separated and 2 separate British colonies, Kiribati and Tuvalu, were formed. On 1 October 1978, Tuvalu became fully independent as a sovereign state within the Commonwealth realm. On 5 September 2000, Tuvalu became the 189th member of the United Nations. History. Prehistory. The origins of the people of Tuvalu are addressed in the theories regarding the migration into the Pacific that began about 3,000 years ago. During pre-European contact times, there was frequent canoe voyaging between the nearer islands, including Samoa and Tonga. 8 of the 9 islands of Tuvalu were inhabited. This explains the origin of the name Tuvalu, which means 8 standing together in Tuvaluan, compared to *Wallo, meaning 8 in Proto-Austronesian. Possible evidence of human-made fires in the caves of Nanumanga suggests humans may have occupied the islands for thousands of years. An important creation myth in the islands of Tuvalu is the story of Te Mo Te Ali, the eel and the flounder, who are said to have created the islands of Tuvalu. Te Ali the flounder is believed to be the origin of the flat atolls of Tuvalu and Te Puzen. The eel is the model for the coconut palms that are important in the lives of Tuvaluans. The stories of the ancestors of the Tuvaluans vary from island to island. On Niutau, Funafuti, and Vanuatu, for instance, the founding ancestor is described as being from Samoa, whereas on Nanumea, the founding ancestor is described as being from Tonga. Early contacts with other cultures. Tuvalu was first sighted by Europeans on 16 January 1568 during the voyage of Álvaro de Mendaña from Spain, who sailed past Niue and charted it as Isla de Jesus, Spanish for Island of Jesus, because the previous day was the Feast of the Holy Name. Mendaña made contact with the islanders, but was unable to land. During Mendaña's second voyage across the Pacific, he passed Niulakita on 29 August 1595, which he named La Solitaria. Captain John Byron passed through the islands of Tuvalu in 1764, during his circumnavigation of the globe as captain of the Dolphin 1751. He charted the atolls as Lagoon Islands. The first recorded sighting of Nanumea by Europeans was by Spanish naval officer Francisco Morel de la Rua, who sailed past it on 5 May 1781 as captain of the frigate La Prince when attempting a southern crossing of the Pacific from the Philippines to New Spain. He charted Nanumea as San Augustin. Keith S. Chambers and Doug Munro 1980 identified Niutau as the island that Morel also sailed past on 5 May 1781, thus solving what Europeans had called the mystery of Gran Coco. Morel's map and journal named the island El Gran Coco, the Great Coconut Plantation. However, the latitude and longitude was uncertain. Longitude could be reckoned only crudely at the time, as accurate chronometers did not become available until the late 18th century. In 1809, Captain Patterson in the brig Elizabeth sighted Nanumea while passing through the northern Tuvalu waters on a trading voyage from Port Jackson, Sydney, Australia to China. In May 1819, Arent Schuyler de Peyster, of New York, captain of the armed brigantine or privateer Rebecca, sailing under British colours, passed through the southern Tuvaluan waters. De Peyster sighted Nuku-Fetau and Funafuti, which he named Ellice's Island after an English politician. Edward Ellice, the Member of Parliament for Coventry and the owner of the Rebecca's cargo. The name Ellice was applied to all 9 islands after the work of English hydrographer Alexander George Findlay. In 1820, the Russian explorer Mikhail Lazier visited Nuku-Fetau as commander of the Murni. Louis Isidore Duperrey, captain of La Coquille, sailed past Nanumea in May 1824 during a circumnavigation of the Earth 1822-1825. A Dutch expedition, the frigate Maria Reigersberg, found Niue on the morning of 14 June 1825 and named the main island Vanuatu as Nederlands Island. Whalers began roving the Pacific, although they visited Tuvalu only infrequently because of the difficulties of landing on the atolls. The American Captain George Barrett of the Nantucket whaler Independence Roman II has been identified as the first whaler to hunt the waters around Tuvalu. He bartered coconuts from the people of Nuku-Lele in November 1821 and also visited Niulakita. He established a shore camp on Sakalua Islet of Nuku-Fetau, where coal was used to melt down the whale blubber. For less than a year between 1862 and 1863, Peruvian ships engaged in the so-called blackbirding trade, by which they recruited or impressed workers, combed the smaller islands of Polynesia, from Easter Island in the eastern Pacific to Tuvalu and the southern atolls of the Gilbert Islands. They sought recruits to fill the extreme labor shortage in Peru. While some islanders were voluntary recruits, the blackbirders were notorious for enticing islanders onto ships with tricks, such as pretending to be Christian missionaries, as well as kidnapping islanders at gunpoint. The Reverend A. W. Murray, the earliest European missionary in Tuvalu, reported that in 1863 about 170 people were taken from Funafuti and about 250 were taken from Nuku-Lele, as there were fewer than 100 of the 300 recorded in 1861 as living on Nuku-Lele. Christianity came to Tuvalu in 1861 when Ilikana, a deacon of a congregational church in Manaiki, Cook Islands, became caught in a storm and drifted for 8 weeks before landing at Nukulele on 10 May 1861. Ilikana began preaching Christianity. He was trained at Malua Theological College, a London Missionary Society LMS school in Samoa, before beginning his work in establishing the Church of Tuvalu. In 1865, the Reverend A. W. Murray of the LMS, a Protestant Congregationalist missionary society, arrived as the first European missionary. He also evangelized among the inhabitants of Tuvalu. By 1878, Protestantism was considered well established, as there were preachers on each island. In the later 19th and early 20th centuries, the ministers of what became the Church of Tuvalu Tuvalu were predominantly Samoans, who influenced the development of the Tuvaluan language and the music of Tuvalu. The islands came into Britain's sphere of influence in the late 19th century, when each of the Ellice Islands was declared a British protectorate by Captain Gibson of HMS Curacoa between 9 and 16 October 1892. Trading firms and traders. Trading companies became active in Tuvalu in the mid-19th century. The trading companies engaged Palogi traders who lived on the islands. John, also known as Jack O'Brien, was the first European to settle in Tuvalu. He became a trader on Funafuti in the 1850s. He married Salai, the daughter of the paramount chief of Funafuti. Louis Beck, who later found success as a writer, was a trader on Nanumango from April 1880 until the trading station was destroyed later that year in a cyclone. He then became a trader on Nuku-Fetau. In 1892, Captain Davis of HMS Royalist reported on trading activities, and traders on each of the islands visited. Captain Davis identified the following traders in the Ellice group: Edmund Duffy Nanumea, Jack Buckland Niutau, Harry Nitzvetupu, Jack O'Brien Funafuti, Alfred Ristiox and Emile Fenisa Nuku-Fetau, and Martin Clays Nui. During this time, the greatest number of Palogi traders lived on the atolls, acting as agents for the trading companies. Some islands would have competing traders, while drier islands might only have a single trader. In the later 1890s and into first decade of the 20th century, structural changes occurred in the operation of the Pacific trading companies. They moved from a practice of having traders resident on each island to instead becoming a business operation, where the supercargo, the cargo manager of a trading ship, would deal directly with the islanders when a ship visited an isle. From 1900, the numbers of Palogi traders in Tuvalu declined. The last of them were Fred Whibley on Niutau, Alfred Ristiox on Nuku-Fetau, and Martin Clays on Nui. By 1909, there were no more resident Palogi traders representing the trading companies, although Whibley, Ristiox, and Clays remained in the islands until their deaths. Scientific expeditions and travelers. The United States exploring expedition under Charles Wilkes visited Funafuti, Nuku-Fetau, and Vanuatu in 1841. During this expedition, engraver and illustrator Alfred Thomas Agate recorded the dress and tattoo patterns of the men of Nuku-Fetau. In 1885 or 1886, the New Zealand photographer Thomas Andrew visited Funafuti and Nui. In 1890, Robert Louis Stevenson, his wife Fanny van de Grift Stevenson, and her son Lloyd Osborne sailed on the Janet Nicol, a trading steamer owned by Henderson and Macfarlane of Auckland, New Zealand, which operated between Sydney and Auckland and into the Central Pacific. The Janet Nicol visited 3 of the Ellice Islands, while Fanny records that they made landfall at Funafuti, Niutau, and Nanumea. Jane Ristere suggests that it was more likely they landed at Nuku-Fetau rather than Funafuti. An account of this voyage was written by Fanny Stevenson and published under the title The Cruise of the Janet Nicol, together with photographs taken by Robert Louis Stevenson and Lloyd Osborne. In 1894, Count Rudolf Festetics de Talna, his wife Isla Nee Hagen, and her daughter Blanche Hagen visited Funafuti aboard the yacht La Talna. The Count spent several days photographing men and women on Funafuti. The boreholes on Funafuti at the site now called Darwin's Drill are the result of drilling conducted by the Royal Society of London for the purpose of investigating the formation of coral reefs to determine whether traces of shallow water organisms could be found at depth in the coral of Pacific. This investigation followed the work on the structure and distribution of coral reefs conducted by Charles Darwin in the Pacific. Drilling occurred in 1896, 1897, and 1898. Professor Edgeworth David of the University of Sydney was a member of the 1896 Funafuti Coral Reef Boring Expedition of the Royal Society under Professor William Salas and led the expedition in 1897. Photographers on these trips recorded people, communities, and scenes at Funafuti. Charles Hedley, a naturalist at the Australian Museum, accompanied the 1896 expedition, and during his stay on Funafuti he collected invertebrate and ethnological objects. The descriptions of these were published in Memoir Roman III of the Australian Museum, Sydney, between 1896 and 1900. Hedley also wrote the general account of the atoll of Funafuti, the ethnology of Funafuti, and the mollusca of Funafuti. Edgar Waite was also part of the 1896 expedition and published the mammals, reptiles, and fishes of Funafuti. William Rainbow described the spiders and insects collected at Funafuti in the Insect Fauna of Funafuti. Harry Clifford Fassett, captain's clerk and photographer, recorded people, communities, and scenes at Funafuti in 1900 during a visit of Usk Albatross when the United States Fish Commission was investigating the formation of coral reefs on Pacific atolls. Colonial administration. The Ellice Islands were administered as a British protectorate from 1892 to 1916 as part of the British Western Pacific Territories (BWPT) by a resident commissioner based in the Gilbert Islands. The administration of the BWTP ended in 1916, and the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony was established, which existed until October 1975. Second World War. During the Second World War, Ellice Islands were informally aligned with the Allies. Early in the war, the Japanese invaded and occupied Makin, Tarawa, and other islands in what is now Kiribati. The United States Marine Corps landed on Funafuti on 2 October 1942 and on Nanumea and Nuku'utao in August 1943. Funafuti was used as a base to prepare for the subsequent seaborne attacks on the Gilbert Islands, Kiribati, that were occupied by Japanese forces. The islanders assisted the American forces to build airfields on Funafuti, Nanumea, and Nuku'utao, and to unload supplies from ships. On Funafuti, the islanders shifted to the smaller islets so as to allow the American forces to build the airfield and to build naval bases and port facilities on Fongafale. A naval construction battalion Seabees built a seaplane ramp on the lagoon side of Fongafale Islet for seaplane operations by both short and long-range seaplanes, and a compacted coral runway was also constructed on Fongafale, with runways also constructed to create Nanumea Airfield and Nuku'utao Airfield. U.S. and patrol torpedo boats PT were based at Funafuti from 2 November 1942 to 11 May 1944. The atolls of Tuvalu acted as staging posts during the preparation for the Battle of Tarawa and the Battle of Makin that commenced on 20 November 1943, which were part of the implementation of Operation Galvanic. After the war, the military airfield on Funafuti was developed into Funafuti International Airport. Post-World War Roman II transition to independence. The formation of the United Nations after World War Roman II resulted in the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization committing to a process of decolonization. As a consequence, the British colonies in the Pacific started on a path to self-determination. In 1974, the ministerial government was introduced to the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony through a change to the constitution. In that year, a general election was held, and a referendum was held in 1974 to determine whether the Gilbert Islands and Ellice Islands should each have their own administration. As a consequence of the referendum, separation occurred in two stages. The Tuvalu in Order 1975, which took effect on 1 October 1975. The second stage occurred on 1 January 1976, when separate administrations were created out of the civil service of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. Elections to the House of Assembly of the British colony of Tuvalu were held on 27 August 1977, with Tokelau being appointed Chief Minister in the House of Assembly of the colony of Tuvalu on 1 October 1977. The House of Assembly was dissolved in July 1978, with the government of Tokelau continuing as a caretaker government until the 1981 elections were held. Tokelau became the first prime minister on 1 October 1978, when Tuvalu became an independent nation. That date is also celebrated as the country's Independence Day and is a public holiday. Tuvalu became fully independent within the Commonwealth on 1 October 1978. On 5 September 2000, Tuvalu became the 189th member of the United Nations. Geography and environment. Geography. Tuvalu is a volcanic archipelago and consists of 3 reef islands, Nanumaga, Niutau, and Nilokita, and 6 true atolls, Funafuti, Nanumea, Niue, Nukufitau, Nukulele, and Vaitupu. Its small, scattered group of low-lying atolls have poor soil and a total land area of only about 26 square kilometers, 10 square miles, making it the 4th smallest country in the world. The highest elevation is 4.6 meters 15 ft above sea level on Nilokita. Over 4 decades, there had been a net increase in land area of the islets of 73.5 ha 2.9%, although the changes are not uniform, with 74% increasing and 27% decreasing in size. The sea level at the Funafuti tide gauge has risen at 3.9 mm per year, which is approximately twice the global average. A 2018 report stated that the rising sea levels are identified as creating an increased transfer of wave energy across reef surfaces, which shifts sand, resulting in accretion to island shorelines. The Tuvalu Prime Minister objected to the report's implication that there were alternate strategies for islanders to adapt to rising sea levels and criticized it for neglecting issues such as saltwater intrusion into groundwater tables as a result of sea level rise. Funafuti is the largest atoll and comprises numerous islets around a central lagoon that is approximately 25.1 kilometers, 15.6 miles NS by 18.4 kilometers, 11.4 miles WE, centered on 179.7 and 8.30s. On the atolls, an annular reef rim surrounds the lagoon with 7 natural reef channels. Surveys were carried out in May 2010 of the reef habitats of Nanumea, Nukulele, and Funafuti. A total of 317 fish species were recorded during this Tuvalu marine life study. The surveys identified 66 species that had not previously been recorded in Tuvalu, which brings the total number of identified species to 607. Tuvalu's exclusive economic zone (EEZ) covers an oceanic area of approximately 900,000 km². Tuvalu is a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. The predominant vegetation type on the islands of Tuvalu is the cultivated coconut woodland, which covers 43% of the land. The native broadleaf forest is limited to 4.1% of the vegetation types. Tuvalu contains the western Polynesian tropical moist forests terrestrial ecoregion. Environmental pressures. Climate. Tuvalu experiences 2 distinct seasons, a wet season from November to April and a dry season from May to October. Westerly gales and heavy rain are the predominant weather conditions from October to March, the period that is known as TOO-və-loo, with tropical temperatures moderated by easterly winds from April to November. Tuvalu experiences the effects of El Niño and La Niña, which is caused by changes in ocean temperatures in the equatorial and central Pacific. El Niño effects increase the chances of tropical storms and cyclones, while La Niña effects increase the chances of drought. Typically, the islands of Tuvalu receive between 200 to 400 mm 8 to 16 in of rainfall per month. The Central Pacific Ocean experiences changes from periods of La Nina to periods of El Nino. Impact of climate change. As low-lying islands lacking a surrounding shallow shelf, the communities of Tuvalu are especially susceptible to changes in sea level and undissipated storms. At its highest, Tuvalu is only 4.6 meters 15 ft above sea level. Tuvaluan leaders have been concerned about the effects of rising sea levels. It is estimated that a sea level rise of 20-40 centimeters, 8-16 inches in the next 100 years could make Tuvalu uninhabitable. A study published in 2018 estimated the change in land area of Tuvalu's 9 atolls and 101 reef islands between 1971 and 2014, indicating that 75% of the islands had grown in area, with an overall increase of more than 2%. Enel Sapoga, the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, responded to the research by stating that Tuvalu is not expanding and has gained no additional habitable land. Sapoga has also said that evacuating the islands is the last resort. Whether there are measurable changes in the sea level relative to the islands of Tuvalu is a contentious issue. There were problems associated with the previous 1,993 sea level records from Funafuti, which resulted in improvements in the recording technology to provide more reliable data for analysis. The degree of uncertainty as to estimates of sea level change relative to the islands of Tuvalu was reflected in the conclusions made in 2002 from the available data. The uncertainty as to the accuracy of the data from this tide gauge resulted in a modern Aquatrack acoustic gauge being installed in 1993 by the Australian National Tidal Facility in TF as part of the Oceania. The 2011 report of the Pacific Climate Change Science Program published by the Australian government concludes the sea level rise near Tuvalu measured by satellite altimeters since 1993 is about 5 mm 0.2 in per year. Tuvalu has adopted a national plan of action as the observable transformations over. These include seawater bubbling up through the porous coral rock to form pools at high tide and the flooding of low-lying areas including the airport during spring tides and king tides. The major concerns about climate change has led to the launching and development of the National Adaptation Program of Action (NAPA). These adaptation measures are needed to decrease the amount and volume of the negative effects from climate change. NAPA has selected 7 adaptation projects with all different themes. These are coastal, agricultural, water, health, fisheries, 2 different projects, and disaster. For example, a target of one of these projects, like the Project Coastal, is increasing resilience of coastal areas and settlement to climate change. And for the Project Water, it is adaptation to frequent water shortages through increasing household water capacity, water collection accessories, and water conservation techniques. Cyclones and king tides. Cyclones. Because of the low elevation, the islands that make up this nation are vulnerable to the effects of tropical cyclones and by the threat of current and future sea level rise. A warning system, which uses the Iridium satellite network, was introduced in 2016 to allow outlying islands to be better prepared for natural disasters. The highest elevation is 4.6 meters 15 ft above sea level on Nilakita. Tuvalu thus has the second lowest maximum elevation of any country after the Maldives. The highest elevations are typically in narrow storm dunes on the ocean side of the islands, which are prone to overtopping in tropical cyclones, as occurred with Cyclone Bebe, which was a very early season storm that passed through the Tuvaluan atolls in October 1972. Cyclone Bebe submerged Funafuti, eliminating 90% of structures on the island. Sources of drinking water were contaminated as a result of the system's storm surge and the flooding of the sources of fresh water. George Westbrook, a trader on Funafuti, recorded a cyclone that struck Funafuti on 23-24 December 1883. A cyclone struck Nukulele on 17-18 March 1886. A cyclone caused severe damage to the islands in 1894. Tuvalu experienced an average of 3 cyclones per decade between the 1940s and 1970s, however, 8 occurred in the 1980s. The impact of individual cyclones is subject to variables including the force of the winds and also whether a cyclone coincides with high tides. Funafuti's Tepuka-Vili Islet was devastated by Cyclone Melly in 1979, with all its vegetation and most of its sand swept away during the cyclone. Along with a tropical depression that affected the islands a few days later, severe tropical cyclone Opha had a major impact on Tuvalu, with most islands reporting damage to vegetation and crops. Cyclone Gavin was first identified during March 1997 and was the first of 3 tropical cyclones to affect Tuvalu during the 1996-97 cyclone season, with cyclones Hina and Kelly following later in the season. In March 2015, the winds and storm surge created by Cyclone Pam resulted in waves of 3 meters (9.8 ft) to 5 meters (16 ft) breaking over the reef of the outer islands, causing damage to houses, crops, and infrastructure. A state of emergency was declared. On Niue, the sources of fresh water were destroyed or contaminated. The flooding in Niue and Nuku'Fetau caused many families to shelter in evacuation centers or with other families. Niue suffered the most damage of the 3 central islands Niue, Nuku'Fetau, and Vanuatu, with both Niue and Nuku'Fetau suffering the loss of 90% of the crops. Of the 3 northern islands, Nanumanga, Niutau, and Nanumea, Nanumanga suffered the most damage, with from 60 to 100 houses flooded, with the waves also causing damage to the health facility. Vasafua Islet, part of the Funafuti Conservation Area, was severely damaged by Cyclone Pam. The coconut palms were washed away, leaving the islet as a sandbar. The Tuvalu government carried out assessments of the damage caused by Cyclone Pam to the islands and has provided medical aid, food, as well as assistance for the cleaning up of storm debris. Government and non-government organizations provided assistance, technical, funding, and material support to Tuvalu to assist with recovery, including WHO, UNICEF, and OCHA, World Bank, DFAT, New Zealand Red Cross, and IFIC, Fiji National University, and governments of New Zealand, Netherlands, UAE, Taiwan, and the United States. King tides. Tuvalu is also affected by perigean spring tide events, which raise the sea level higher than a normal high tide. The highest peak tide recorded by the Tuvalu Meteorological Service is 3.4 meters 11 ft on 24 February 2006 and again on 19 February 2015. As a result of the historical sea level rise, the king tide events lead to flooding of low-lying areas, which is compounded when sea levels are further raised by La Nina effects or local storms and waves. Water and sanitation. Rainwater harvesting is the principal source of fresh water in Tuvalu. Nuku'Fetau, Vanuatu, and Nanumea are the only islands with sustainable groundwater supplies. The effectiveness of rainwater harvesting is diminished because of poor maintenance of roofs, gutters, and pipes. Aid programs of Australia and the European Union have been directed to improving the storage capacity on Funafuti and in the outer islands. Reverse osmosis R/O desalination units supplement rainwater harvesting on Funafuti. The 65 m3 desalination plant operates at a real production level of around 40 m3 per day. R/O water is only intended to be produced when storage falls below 30%. However, demand to replenish household storage supplies with tanker-delivered water means that the R/O desalination units are continually operating. Water is delivered at a cost of $3.50 per m3. Cost of production and delivery has been estimated at $6 per m3, with the difference subsidized by the government. In July 2012, a United Nations Special Rapporteur called on the Tuvalu government to develop a national water strategy In 2012, Tuvalu developed a national water resources policy under the Integrated Water Resource Management project and the Pacific Adaptation to Climate Change PAC project, which are sponsored by the Global Environment Fund/SAPAC. Government water planning has established a target of between 50 and 100 L of water per person per day, accounting for drinking water, cleaning, community and cultural activities. Tuvalu is working with the South Pacific Applied Geoscience Commission SAPAC to implement composting toilets and to improve the treatment of sewage sludge from septic tanks on Fongafale, for septic tanks are leaking into the freshwater lens in the subsurface of the atoll as well as the ocean and lagoon. Composting toilets reduce water use by up to 30%. Government. Parliamentary democracy. The Constitution of Tuvalu states that it is the supreme law of Tuvalu and that all other laws shall be interpreted and applied subject to this Constitution. It sets out the principles of the Bill of Rights and the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms. Tuvalu is a parliamentary democracy and Commonwealth realm with Elizabeth II as Queen of Tuvalu. Since the Queen resides in the United Kingdom, she is represented in Tuvalu by a Governor-General, whom she appoints upon the advice of the Prime Minister of Tuvalu. In 1986 and 2008, referenda confirmed the monarchy. From 1974, the creation of the British colony of Tuvalu, until independence, the legislative body of Tuvalu was called the House of the Assembly or Fale-i-Fono. Following independence in October 1978, the House of the Assembly was renamed the Parliament of Tuvalu or Parliament o Tuvalu. The place at which the Parliament sits is called the Vanuatu Mainapa. The Mainapa on each island is an open meeting place where the chiefs and elders deliberate and make decisions. The unicameral Parliament has 16 members, with elections held every 4 years. The members of Parliament select the Prime Minister, who is the head of government, and the Speaker of Parliament. The ministers that form the cabinet are appointed by the Governor-General on the advice of the Prime Minister. There are no formal political parties. Election campaigns are largely based on personal/family ties and reputations. The Tuvalu National Library and Archives holds vital documentation on the cultural, social and political heritage of Tuvalu, including surviving records from the colonial administration, as well as Tuvalu government archives. Tuvalu is a state party to the following human rights treaties: the Convention on the Rights of the Child (CRC), the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women (CEDAW), and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities (CRPD). Tuvalu has commitments to ensuring human rights are respected under the Universal Periodic Review (UPR) and the Sustainable Development Goals (SDG). The National Strategy Plan (TKEAP) National Strategy for Sustainable Development 2021-2030 sets out the development agenda of the government of Tuvalu, which followed on from TKEAP Roman III National Strategy for Sustainable Development -2016-2020 TK Roman III. The areas of development in these strategic plans include education, climate change, environment, migration, and urbanization. The Tuvalu National Council for Women acts as an umbrella organization for non-governmental women's rights groups throughout the country and works closely with the government. Legal system. STEM. There are 8 island courts and lands courts. Appeals in relation to land disputes are made to the Lands Courts Appeal Panel. Appeals from the Island Courts and the Lands Courts Appeal Panel are made to the Magistrates Court, which has jurisdiction to hear civil cases involving up to $10,000. The Superior Court is the High Court of Tuvalu, as it has unlimited original jurisdiction to determine the law of Tuvalu and to hear appeals from the lower courts. Rulings of the High Court can be appealed to the Court of Appeal of Tuvalu. From the Court of Appeal, there is a right of appeal to Her Majesty in Council, i.e. the Privy Council in London. With regard to the judiciary, the first female island court magistrate was appointed to the Island Court in Nanumea in the 1980s and another in Ukulele in the early 1990s. There were 7 female magistrates in the island courts of Tuvalu as of 2007, in comparison to the past where only 1 woman magistrate served in the magistrate court of Tuvalu. The law of Tuvalu comprises the acts voted into law by the Parliament of Tuvalu and statutory instruments that become law, certain acts passed by the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The land tenure system is largely based on Kaitasi extended family ownership. Foreign relations. Tuvalu participates in the work of the Pacific Community (SPC) and is a member of the Pacific Islands Forum, the Commonwealth of Nations, and the United Nations. It has maintained a mission at the United Nations in New York City since 2000. It is a member of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Tuvalu maintains close relations with Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, which has maintained a high commission in Tuvalu since 2018, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. It has diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The country maintains one of the 2 foreign embassies in Tuvalu and has a large assistance program in the islands. A major international priority for Tuvalu in the UN at the 2002 Earth Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, and in other international fora is promoting concern about global warming and the possible sea level rising. Tuvalu advocates ratification and implementation of the Kyoto Protocol. In December 2009, the islands stalled talks on climate change at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, fearing some other developing countries were not committing fully to binding deals on a reduction in carbon emissions. Their chief negotiator stated, Tuvalu is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, and our future rests on the outcome of this meeting. Tuvalu participates in the Alliance of Small Island States (AOSIS), which is a coalition of small island and low-lying coastal countries that have concerns about their vulnerability to the adverse effects of global warming. Under the Majuro Declaration, which was signed on 5 September 2013, Tuvalu has made a commitment to implement power generation of 100% renewable energy between 2013 and 2020. The feasibility of wind power generation will be considered. Tuvalu participates in the operations of the Pacific Islands Applied Geoscience Commission (SAPAC) and the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program (SPREP). Tuvalu is party to a treaty of friendship with the United States, signed soon after independence and ratified by the U.S. Senate in 1983, under which the United States renounced prior territorial claims to 4 Tuvaluan islands Funafuti, Nuku'efetuw, Nuku'lele, and Nilokita under the Guano Islands Act of 1856. Tuvalu participates in the operations of the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agency (FFA) and the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission (WCPFC). The Tuvaluan government, the U.S. government, and the governments of other Pacific islands are parties to the South Pacific Tuna Treaty (SPTT), which entered into force in 1988. Tuvalu is also a member of the Nauru Agreement, which addresses the management of tuna purse seine fishing in the tropical Western Pacific. The United States and the Pacific Islands countries have negotiated the Multilateral Fisheries Treaty, which encompasses the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, to confirm access to the fisheries in the Western and Central Pacific for you. Tuvalu and the other members of the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agency (FFA) and the United States have settled a tuna fishing deal for 2015. A longer-term deal will be negotiated. The treaty is an extension of the Nauru Agreement and provides for the U.S.-flagged purse seine vessels to fish 8,300 days in the region in return for a payment of $90 million made up by tuna fishing industry and U.S. government contributions. In 2015, Tuvalu refused to sell fishing days to certain nations and fleets that have blocked Tuvaluan initiatives to develop and sustain their own fishery. In 2016, the Minister of Natural Resources drew attention to Article 30 of the WCPF. In July 2013, Tuvalu signed the Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) to establish the Pacific Regional Trade and Development Facility, which facility originated in 2006. in the context of negotiations for an Economic Partnership Agreement (EPA) between Pacific ACP states and the European Union. The rationale for the creation of the facility being to improve the delivery of aid to Pacific Island countries in support of the Aid for Trade (AFT) requirements. The Pacific ACP states are the countries in the Pacific that are signatories to the Cotonou Agreement with the European Union. On 31 May 2017, the first enhanced high-level political dialogue between Tuvalu and the European Union under the Cotonou Agreement was held in Funafuti. On 18 February 2016, Tuvalu signed the Pacific Islands Development Forum Charter and formally joined the Pacific Islands Development Forum (PID). In June 2017, Tuvalu signed the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations (PACER). Defense and law enforcement. Tuvalu has no regular military forces and spends no money on the military. Its national police force, the Tuvalu Police Force headquartered in Funafuti, includes a maritime surveillance unit, customs, prisons, and immigration. Police officers wear British-style uniforms. From 1994 to 2019, the Tuvalu policed its 200-kilometer exclusive economic zone with the Pacific-class patrol boat HMS Curacoa, provided by Australia. In 2019, Australia gifted a Guardian-class patrol boat as replacement. Named HMS Curacoa Roman II, it is meant for use in maritime surveillance, fishery patrol, and for search and rescue missions. HMS stands for His/Her Majesty's Tuvaluan State Ship or for His/Her Majesty's Tuvalu Surveillance Ship. Male homosexuality is illegal in Tuvalu. Crime in Tuvalu is not a significant social problem due to an effective criminal justice system, also due to the influence of the Failkapule, the traditional assembly of elders of each island, and the central role of religious institutions in the Tuvaluan community. Administrative divisions. Tuvalu consists of 6 atolls and 3 reef islands. The smallest, Niulakita, is administered as part of Niue Tao. Each island has its own high chief, or Lulu Alaki, and several sub-chiefs Alakis. The community council is the Failkapule, the traditional assembly of elders, or Tisina o Whenua, literally, gray hairs of the land. In the past, another caste, the priests Tufuga, were also amongst the decision-makers. The Ulu Alaki and Alaki exercise informal authority at the local level. Ulu Alaki are always chosen based on ancestry. Under the Failkapule Act 1997, the powers and functions of the Failkapule are now shared with the Pule Okapule elected village presidents, one on each atoll. Local government districts consisting of more than one islet: Funafuti, Nanumea, Niue, Nukufitau, Nukulele, Ilalii. Vaitupu local government districts consisting of only one island: Nanumanga, Niulakita. Butau Tuvalu has ISO 3166-2 codes defined for 1 town council, Funafuti, and 7 island councils. Niulakita, which now has its own island council, is not listed as it is administered as part of Niue Tao. Society. Demographics. The population at the 2002 census was 9,561, and the population at the 2017 census was 10,645. The most recent evaluation in 2020 puts the population at 11,342. The population of Tuvalu is primarily of Polynesian ethnicity, with approximately 5.6% of the population being Micronesians speaking Gilbertese, especially on Niue. Life expectancy for women in Tuvalu is 70.2 years and 65.6 years for men 2018 EST. The country's population growth rate is 0.86% 2018 EST. The net migration rate is estimated at 6.6 migrants/1,000 population 2018 EST. The threat of global warming in Tuvalu is not yet a dominant motivation for migration, as Tuvaluans appear to prefer to continue living on the islands for reasons of lifestyle, culture, and identity. From 1947 to 1983, a number of Tuvaluans from Vanuatu migrated to Kioa, an island in Fiji. The settlers from Tuvalu were granted Fijian citizenship in 2005. In recent years, New Zealand and Australia have been the primary destinations for migration or seasonal work. In 2014, attention was drawn to an appeal to the New Zealand Immigration and Protection Tribunal against the deportation of a Tuvaluan family on the basis that they were climate change refugees who would suffer hardship resulting from the environmental degradation of Tuvalu. However, the subsequent grant of residence permits to the family was made on grounds unrelated to the refugee claim. The family was successful in their appeal because, under the relevant immigration legislation, there were exceptional circumstances of a humanitarian nature that justified the grant of resident permits, for the family was integrated into New Zealand society with a sizable extended family that had effectively relocated to New Zealand. Indeed, in 2013, a claim of a Kiribati man of being a climate change refugee under the Convention relating to the status of refugees 1951 was determined by the New Zealand High Court to be untenable, for there was no persecution or serious harm related to any of the 5 stipulated Refugee Convention grounds. Permanent migration to Australia and New Zealand, such as for family reunification, requires compliance with the immigration legislation of those countries. New Zealand has an annual quota of 75 Tuvaluans granted work permits under the Pacific Access category, as announced in 2001. The applicants register for the Pacific Access category PAC ballots. The primary criterion is that the principal applicant must have a job offer from a New Zealand employer. Tuvaluans also have access to seasonal employment in the horticulture and viticulture industries in New Zealand under the recognized Seasonal Employer RSE work policy introduced in 2007, allowing for a Tuvaluans can participate in the Australian Pacific Seasonal Worker Program, which allows Pacific Islanders to obtain seasonal employment in the Australian agriculture industry, in particular cotton and cane operations, fishing industry, in particular aquaculture, and with accommodation providers in the tourism industry. Languages. The Tuvaluan language and English are the national languages of Tuvalu. Tuvaluan is of the Elysian group of Polynesian languages, distantly related to all other Polynesian languages such as Hawaiian, Maori. It is most closely related to the languages spoken on the Polynesian outliers in Micronesia and northern and central Melanesia. The Tuvaluan language has borrowed from the Samoan language as a consequence of Christian missionaries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries being predominantly Samoan. The Tuvaluan language is spoken by virtually everyone, while a language very similar to Gilbertese is spoken on Niue. English is also an official language, but is not spoken in daily use. Parliament and official functions are conducted in the Tuvaluan language. There are about 13,000 Tuvaluan speakers worldwide. Radio Tuvalu transmits Tuvaluan language programming. Religion. The Congregational Christian Church of Tuvalu, which is part of the Calvinist tradition, is the state church of Tuvalu, although in practice this merely entitles it to the privilege of performing special services on major national events. Its adherents comprise about 97% of the 10,837 2012 census inhabitants of the archipelago. The Constitution of Tuvalu guarantees freedom of religion, including the freedom to practice, the freedom to change religion, the right not to receive religious instruction at school or to attend religious ceremonies at school, and the right not to take an oath or make an affirmation that is contrary to his religion or belief. Other Christian groups include the Catholic community served by the Mission Sui Iuris of Funafuti, and the Seventh-day Adventist, which has 2.8% of the population. According to its own estimates, the Tuvalu Brethren Church has about 500 members, i.e. 4.5% of the population. The Baha'i faith is the largest minority religion and the largest non-Christian religion in Tuvalu. It constitutes 2.0% of the population. The Bahais are the majority on the Nanumea island of Tuvalu. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community consists of about 50 members, 0.4% of the population. The introduction of Christianity ended the worship of ancestral spirits and other deities animism, along with the power of the Vanuatu, the priests of the old religions. Lomu Akof describes the objects of worship as varying from island to island, although ancestor worship was described by Reverend D.J. Whitney in 1870 as being common practice. Health. The Princess Margaret Hospital on Funafuti is the only hospital in Tuvalu and the primary provider of medical services. This is headed by National Health Advisor Daniel Wilson of Funafuti. Since the late 20th century, the biggest health problem in Tuvalu and the leading cause of death has been heart disease, which is closely followed by diabetes and high blood pressure. In 2016, the majority of deaths resulted from cardiac diseases, with diabetes mellitus, hypertension, obesity, and cerebral vascular disease among the other causes of death. Education. Education in Tuvalu is free and compulsory between the ages of 6 and 15 years. Each island has a primary school. Matufua Secondary School is located on Vanuatu. Students board at the school during the school term, returning to their home islands each school vacation. Tuvalu Secondary School, a day school operated by the Church of Tuvalu, is on Funafuti. Tuvalu offers the Cambridge syllabus. Matufua offers the Fiji Junior Certificate FJC at Year 10, Tuvaluan Certificate at Year 11, and the Pacific Senior Secondary Certificate PSSC at Year 12, which is set by SPB, the Fiji-based exam board. Sixth form students who pass their PSSC go on to the Augmented Foundation Program, funded by the Tuvalu government. This program is required for tertiary education programs outside of Tuvalu and is available at the University of the South Pacific USB Extension Center in Funafuti. Required attendance at school is 10 years for males and 11 years for females. 2001. The adult literacy rate is 99.0%. 2002. In 2010, there were 1918 students who were taught by 109 teachers, 98 certified. The teacher-pupil ratio for primary schools in Tuvalu is around 1:18 for all schools with the exception of Naughty School, which has a ratio of 1:27. Naughty School on Funafuti is the largest primary school in Tuvalu with more than 900 students, 45% of the total primary school enrollment. The pupil-teacher ratio for Tuvalu is low compared to the entire Pacific region ratio of 1:29. Community training centers (CTC) have been established within the primary schools on each atoll. They provide vocational training to students who do not progress beyond Class 8 because they failed the entry qualifications for secondary education. The CTC offer training in basic carpentry, gardening and farming, sewing and cooking. At the end of their studies, the graduates can apply to continue studies either at Matufua Secondary School or the Tuvalu Maritime Training Institute (TMTI). Adults can also attend courses at the CTC. Four tertiary institutions offer technical and vocational courses: Tuvalu Maritime Training Institute (TMTI), Tuvalu Atoll Science Technology Training Institute (TASTI), Australian Pacific Training Coalition (APT), and University of the South Pacific USB Extension Center. The Tuvaluan Employment Ordinance of 1966 sets the minimum age for paid employment at 14 years and prohibits children under the age of 15 from performing hazardous work. Culture. Architecture. The traditional buildings of Tuvalu used plants and trees from the native broadleaf forest, including timber from Pauca hernandea peltata, Banjaya or Injaya bush Pemphius acidula, Myrothespesia populnea, Tonga rhizophora macronata, Phao or Faux Fafini, or woman's fiber tree Hibiscus tiliaceus. Fiber is from coconut, Phara native fig Ficus aspum phala screw pine or pandanus. The buildings were constructed without nails and were lashed together with a plated sinnet rope that was handmade from dried coconut fiber. Following contact with Europeans, iron products were used including nails and corrugated roofing material. Modern building in Tuvalu are constructed from imported building materials, including imported timber and concrete. Church and community buildings Mainapa are usually coated with white paint that is known as lace, which is made by burning a large amount of dead coral with firewood. The whitish powder that is the result is mixed with water and painted on the buildings. Art of Tuvalu. The women of Tuvalu use cowrie and other shells in traditional handicrafts. The artistic traditions of Tuvalu have traditionally been expressed in the design of clothing and traditional handicrafts, such as the decoration of mats and fans. Crochet collows is one of the art forms practiced by Tuvaluan women. The design of women's skirts titi, tops chugasaka, headbands, armbands, and wristbands, which continue to be used in performances of the traditional dance songs of Tuvalu, represents contemporary Tuvaluan art and design. The material culture of Tuvalu uses traditional design elements and artifacts used in everyday life, such as the design of canoes and fish hooks made from traditional materials. In 2015, an exhibition was held on Funafuti of the art of Tuvalu with works that addressed climate change through the eyes of artists and the display of canoe-alaga possessions of life, a display of the various artifacts of Tuvalu culture. Dance and music. The traditional music of Tuvalu consists of a number of dances, including Fakisasia, Fakanau, and Fatal. The Fatal, in its modern form, is performed at community events and to celebrate leaders and other prominent individuals, such as the visit of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in September 2012. The Tuvaluan style can be described as a musical microcosm of Polynesia, where contemporary and older styles coexist. Cuisine. The cuisine of Tuvalu is based on the staple of coconut and the many species of fish found in the ocean and lagoons of the atolls. Desserts made on the islands include coconut and coconut milk rather than animal milk. The traditional foods eaten in Tuvalu are pilaka, taro, bananas, breadfruit, and coconut. Tuvaluans also eat seafood, including coconut crab and fish from the lagoon and ocean. Another traditional food source is seabirds takatake or black noddy and akeiki or white tern, with pork being eaten mostly at fatals or parties with dancing to celebrate events. Filaka is the main source for carbohydrates. Seafood provides protein. Bananas and breadfruit are supplemental crops. Coconut is used for its juice, to make other beverages such as toddy, and to improve the taste of some dishes. A 1560 square meter pond was built in 1996 on Vanuatu to sustain aquaculture in Tuvalu. Flying fish are also caught as a source of food and as an exciting activity using a boat, a butterfly net, and a spotlight to attract the flying fish. Heritage. The traditional community system still survives to a large extent on Tuvalu. Each family has its own task, or salanga, to perform for the community, such as fishing, house building, or defense. The skills of a family are passed on from parents to children. Most islands have their own fusi, community-owned shops similar to convenience stores where canned foods and bags of rice can be purchased. Goods are cheaper, and fusis give better prices for their own produce. Another important building is the Failkapule or Mainapa, the traditional island meeting hall, where important matters are discussed and which is also used for wedding celebrations and community activities. Failkapule is also used as the name of the Council of Elders, the traditional decision-making body on each island. Under the Failkapule Act, Failkapule means traditional assembly in each island, composed in accordance with the aganu of each island. Aganu means traditional customs and culture. Tuvalu does not have any museums, however the creation of a Tuvalu National Cultural Center and Museum is part of the government's strategic plan for 2018-24. Traditional single outrigger canoe. Peapau from the Samoan language, meaning a small fishing canoe made from a single log, is the traditional single outrigger canoe of Tuvalu, of which the largest could carry 4 to 6 adults. The variations of single outrigger canoes that had been developed on Vanuatu and Nauru were reef-type or paddled canoes, that is, they were designed for carrying over the reef and being paddled, rather than being sailed. Outrigger canoes from Niue were constructed with an indirect type of outrigger attachment, and the hull is double-ended, with no distinct bow and stern. These canoes were designed to be sailed over the Niue Lagoon. The booms of the outrigger are longer than those found in other designs of canoes from the other islands. This made the Niue canoe more stable when used with a sail than the other designs. Sport and leisure. A traditional sport played in Tuvalu is kilokiti, which is similar to cricket. A popular sport specific to Tuvalu is te-ano the ball, which is played with two round balls of 12 cm 5 in diameter. Te-ano is a traditional game that is similar to volleyball, in which the two hard balls made from pandanus leaves are volleyed at great speed with the team members trying to stop the ball hitting the ground. Traditional sports in the late 19th century were foot racing, lance throwing, quarterstaff fencing, and wrestling, although the Christian missionaries disapproved of these activities. The popular sports in Tuvalu include kilokiti, te-ano, association football, futsal, volleyball, handball, basketball, and rugby union. Tuvalu has sports organizations for athletics, badminton, tennis, table tennis, volleyball, football, basketball, rugby union, weightlifting, and powerlifting. At the 2013 Pacific Mini Games, Tuvalu won Tuvalu's first gold medal in an international competition in the weightlifting 62-kilogram male snatch. He also won bronze in the clean and jerk and obtained the silver medal overall for the combined event. In 2015, Teluk-Iosfer received the first gold medal won by Tuvalu at the Pacific Games in the powerlifting 120 kg male division. Football in Tuvalu is played at club and national team level. The Tuvalu national football team trains at the Tuvalu Sports Ground in Funafuti and competes in the Pacific Games. The Tuvalu National Football Association is an associate member of the Oceania Football Confederation (OSC) and is seeking membership in FIFA. The Tuvalu national futsal team participates in the Oceanian Futsal Championship. A major sporting event is the Independence Day Sports Festival held annually on 1 October. The most important sports event within the country is arguably the Tuvalu Games, which are held yearly since 2008. Tuvalu first participated in the Pacific Games in 1978 and in the Commonwealth Games in 1998, when a weightlifter attended the games held at Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Two table tennis players attended the 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester, England. Tuvalu entered competitors in shooting, table tennis, and weightlifting at the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, Australia. 3 athletes participated in the 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi, India, entering the discus, shot put, and weightlifting events, and Tuvaluan athletes have also participated in the men's and women's 100 meters sprint at the World Championships in Athletics from 2009. The Tuvalu Association of Sports and National Olympic Committee TASNOC was recognized as a National Olympic Committee in July 2007. Tuvalu entered the Olympic Games for the first time at the 2008 Summer Games in Beijing, China, with a weightlifter and 2 athletes in the men's and women's 100 meters sprint. A team with athletes in the same events represented Tuvalu at the 2012 Summer Olympics. Etimoni Timuani was the sole representative of Tuvalu at the 2016 Summer Olympics in the 100m event. Carolo Mabuka and Matty Stanley represented Tuvalu at the 2020 Summer Olympics in the 100m events. Economy and government services. Economy. Tourism. Due to the country's remoteness, tourism is not significant. Visitors totaled 1,684 in 2010, 65% were on business, development officials or technical consultants, 20% were tourists, 360 people, and 11% were expatriates returning to visit family. In 2016, the number of visitors had increased to 2,000. The main island of Funafuti is the focus of travelers, since the only airport in Tuvalu is the Funafuti International Airport, and Funafuti is the only island that has hotel facilities. However, there are no tour guides, tour operators, or organized activities, and no cruise ships visit. Ecotourism is a motivation of travelers to Tuvalu. The Funafuti Conservation Area consists of 12.74 square miles, 33.0 square kilometers of ocean, reef, lagoon, channel, and 6 uninhabited islets. The outer atolls can be visited on the 2 passenger cargo ships, Navaga Roman III and Manu-Falau, which provide round-trip visits to the outer islands every 3 or 4 weeks. There is guesthouse accommodation on many of the outer islands. Telecommunications and media. The Tuvalu Media Department of the Government of Tuvalu operates Radio Tuvalu, which broadcasts from Funafuti. In 2011, the Japanese government provided financial support to construct a new AM broadcast studio. The installation of upgraded transmission equipment allows Radio Tuvalu to be heard on all 9 islands of Tuvalu. The new AM radio transmitter on Funafuti replaced the FM radio service to the outer islands and freed up satellite bandwidth for mobile services. Fenui News from Tuvalu is a free digital publication of the Tuvalu Media Department that is emailed to subscribers and operates a Facebook page which publishes news about government activities and news about Tuvalu and events. On 28 September 2020, the first private newspaper to operate in the country, Tuvalu Paradise News, was launched. The chief executive officer and owner of KMT News Corporation, the publisher and editor of the print newspaper and website, is the Reverend Dr. Kishana Tossi. The Tuvalu Telecommunications Corporation (TTC), a state-owned enterprise, provides fixed-line telephone communications to subscribers on each island, mobile phone services on Funafuti, Vanuatu, and Nukulele, and is a distributor of the Fiji television service Sky Pacific satellite television service. Communications in Tuvalu rely on satellite dishes for telephone and internet access. The available bandwidth is only 512 kbps uplink and 1.5 mbits/s downlink. Throughout Tuvalu are more than 900 subscribers who want to use the satellite service, with demand slowing down the speed of the system. Transport. There are limited transport services in Tuvalu. There are about 8 kilometers, 5 miles of roads. The streets of Funafuti were paved in mid-2002, but other roads are unpaved. Tuvalu does not have any railroads. Funafuti is the only port, but there is a deep water berth in the lagoon at Nukufitau. The merchant marine fleet consists of 2 passenger/cargo ships, Navaga Roman III and Manu-Falau. The Navaga Roman III and Manu-Falau provide round-trip visits to the outer islands every 3 or 4 weeks and travel between Suva, Fiji, and Funafuti 3 or 4 times a year. The Manu-Falau, a 50-meter vessel, was a gift from Japan to the people of Tuvalu. In 2015, the Navaga Roman III was donated by the government of Japan. It replaced the Navaga Roman II, which had been in service in Tuvalu from 1989. In 2020, the government of Tuvalu purchased a landing barge, which is intended to transport of dangerous goods and building material from the capital to the outer islands. The barge was named Moitava. The government of Taiwan provided financial assistance. The Tuvalu Fisheries Department operates 2 vessels for carrying out its activities within the country's exclusive economic zone (EEZ) and outer islands. These are the 18-meter Manoe and 32-meter Talamona. The vessels are used for fisheries research, deploying fish aggregating devices FAD, visiting outer islands for monitoring and consultations, including to implement Tuvalu's National Adaptation Program of Action (NAPA) to address climate change. The Manoe was procured through the Japan International Cooperation Agency (JICA) in 1989 and is nearing the end of its life. In 2015, the United Nations Development Programme provided assistance to acquire Talamona, which is also used for monitoring control and surveillance in CS patrols. The only international airport in Tuvalu is Funafuti International Airport. It is a tarred strip. Fiji Airways, the owner of Fiji Airlines, trading as Fiji Link, operates services 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday between Suva, originating from Nadi and Funafuti, with ATR 72-600, a 68-seat plane. Air Kiribati service provides 1 flight a week to Funafuti from Tarawa on a Wednesday. The service uses a Bombardier-8-100 series aircraft. In 2021, the government of Tuvalu planned to introduce domestic air services to the outer islands. The project involves constructing the runways after concluding leases of the land and paying tree compensation to the landowners. On Nanumea, the people agreed to use the airfield constructed during World War II by the American Marines. Filmography and bibliography. Filmography.